Welcome to 3.9. We're going to do some work here talking about demographic transition and kind of like what exactly this is. When we're talking about demographic transition, this is the change that we see in countries as they go from this pre-industrial state, very agricultural based, to the post-industrial state, which is very much like modern cities today in Korea and Japan, the US and Europe, and so on and so. This is broken apart into 4 stages. Stage 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And we're going to be measuring some different things. We're going to be looking at time, and we're going to be looking at the births and the deaths per thousand. So that's kind of what we're looking for along the way. So what does our population look like? What is our death rate? And then also what our birth rate is as we move through these phases. Stage 1. This is our pre-industrial state. So we're looking at this one right here. You can see that we have a very high death rate, and we also have a very high birth rate, and that our population growth is very close to 0. So our growth that we see here is not increasing. It's staying the same. This death rate is high because of limited food supply. We don't have medical care. We have poor sanitation. There's not those resources that are available to support this population. We're very much living on the land still. Our birth rate is also high because we need workers. We need people to provide farming. So a family needs a lot of children so that those children can help out as labor around the farm. That's why our birth rate is going to be so high. And we've talked about this before, but when the birth rate is high and many of those children are not surviving, we're going to have more babies to compensate for that. Anytime we do have a change in food supply, we're going to have a massive fluctuation in population size. And then up until the 18th centuries, almost every country was at stage 1. Now we don't have any. There's no more left anymore. So you can see here, this represents a stage 1 age diagram graph. So we have massive at the bottom. It looks like a Christmas tree. Tons at the age of 0 to 4. But many of those are not living to get to 5 to 9, and so on. So our death rate is extremely high as we move up. Stage 2, we're going to call this the transitional stage. You're going to notice, biggest thing here, we have a fall in the death rate, and we start to increase in our population size. So here is stage 2. Our death rate is dropping and our population is starting to grow a little bit. This is happening because of improvements in public health care, sanitation, agricultural practices. Maybe we're using tractors now and we don't need the hard labor of people. Public health care, maybe we've just increased that sanitation, or we're able to at least support people with the basic healthcare needs. Our birth rate is still high because there's that societal expectation of a family size. Everyone is used to having large families. That's how they grew up, so they continue that. But the biggest thing here is that we have a decrease in death rate among children. And this causes this expansion at the base of our age structure diagram. So as I mentioned, this used to be more of like a Christmas tree, but now this area, we're having fewer children die off when they get to reproductive age. And therefore, if these 2 bars stay larger, that's going to move up the chain, creating a population growth. Right, stage 3, I just want to point out already, if you look at this age structure diagram, wow, look, we've got a solid group up into the 30s. That's a big deal. So stage 3, we're going to see a fall in the birth rate, and you can see that right here. Massive fall in the birth rate. Our population is going to continue growing, and our death rate's already low. So difference between stage 2 and stage 3, Stage 2, our death rate is dropping. Stage 3, our birth rate is dropping. Our birth rate is dropping, and this is huge. I need you to write this down. It is dropping because we are educating women, and we are providing them with contraception and economic opportunities. This is huge. When you have women who are educated, when they have opportunities, they don't want to be at home tending for children. And then it allows for this urbanization to happen. And therefore, we don't need large families anymore because we have this urbanization and industrialization that has happened. We don't need the labor force like we did before because we have that in the form of this industrial and urbanization that's happened. The most important, a woman's status is no longer linked to her fertility. It's a big movement. And because of that, that birth rate's going to drop. Countries we see like this right now, a lot of this is happening in Mexico, Colombia, Kenya, India. We're seeing a lot of that movement right now. Finally, we have the stage 4, which is the post-industrial stage. We've got a lot of low birth rate and also very low death rate. So we're kind of at the opposite of how we started in stage 1. Our population starts to stop growing. So you can see the slope here is starting to go back to 0 again. And this is all because our family size is starting to get small. It's expensive to raise a child. It's expensive to get a contraception. And so therefore, families just are trying to stay small instead of trying to raise all these children in a very expensive urbanized center. And though it's expensive, this urbanization is great. We have fantastic infrastructures. We have economic opportunities. We have school. There's growth. Everyone has jobs. They feel this purpose. So it's a fantastic place to be in, but it does lead to this population slowdown. Now, I said last one for stage before because that's the last one on the AP exam. Stage 5 is not on the AP exam, but we're starting to see this in a lot of countries, especially Japan and Korea. This is interesting. We are getting a TFR that's below 2.1, and we have this fertility that is not being replaced year after year. So you can see this population was this big. It's being replaced by a much smaller population below it. This population is decreasing because our birth rate is dropping even lower than it was before. This is all because women are professionals. They're waiting till they're after 30 to have children. And we've talked about previously how important it is. If you want to grow in population, then we need women to start reproducing at a younger age. But because they're involved in their profession, they're waiting till they're after 30 to have children. And as I mentioned before, the cost of raising those children is a lot more expensive. So families are becoming much smaller instead. And now, unfortunately, like we're running to in Korea and we're running to in Japan, we have this large aging population that's in their 50s to 80s that now needs to be cared for. And that is unfortunately putting a big financial burden on society. This would not exist if we had the same size population or greater below it. So just an interesting tidbit there. Takeaways that we need to be aware of. This is going to show us how a nation's population, birth rate, and death rate are historically correlated over time, how we've seen this since the early 18th century until now. Some of our less developed countries, they're in the later part of stage 2, the early part of stage 3, and they're currently undergoing this industrialization. No one is still in stage 1. That's important. And just remember, with this transition model, our population is going to go from no growth to growing slow, speeds up in the middle, and then it's going to end with little to no growth. So looking at this again, we have no growth, speeds up, slows down, and then no growth again. That's our general trend that we're looking at. That's all I got. Thanks, guys.